Hello. Hello again. I always think of things to do here. I'm going to France next week, so there'll be some new material on this channel. This should be interesting. I was reading the other day about the disciples and how they died, and I didn't really realize fully what happened to these men and the implications it has on us Christians, followers of Christ. I'll warn you, I'm going to read over this, and I'm going to post some old artwork, the depictions of these disciples, and they're all like, they're really old paintings and drawings, So I'm going to warn you, some of this is very brutal, not pretty brutal, very extremely brutal. Brutal people still exist today. It's not just something from the old world, as you know. But these men, followers of Jesus Christ, a lot of them knew him. Not all of them. I mean, in the flesh with him physically during his time, his 3 years in ministry. And then, he was crucified and rose from the dead and appeared to the disciples and ascended up to heaven. And what did these men do after that? Well, they didn't just pack it in and go back to fishing full-time or whatever they did for a living, tax collecting for Matthew, such. They took up the cross and they went out preaching and preaching the word. And that is to say, they really established the church, which is, Jesus picked these people from all walks of life in his society, but he must have known that they would do this, and they did. And as you know, they crucified our Lord, and they certainly didn't spare his disciples anything either. And a lot of them could have gotten out of it. They had a choice, just like Christ did. Now it's where they were from in the Middle East, we call it today, but Jerusalem, Israel today, and modern day Turkey and Israel, that area. It's kind of very well situated, tactically speaking, for a church to start, because these men spread the word of Christ into Africa and up into Europe and over to Britain and over into Asia, India, all over. These guys really traveled and spread the word of Christ all over. And they weren't from Africa, they weren't from Europe, they were right in between. And God he knew this, he had a plan. So they traveled around and did spread the word of Jesus Christ, the good news. And all but one of them met a violent death. And most of them were quite old men, really, elderly, when they were martyred. So I'm going to read off how each one of these men died briefly. Now I want to tell you that I did a lot more reading in it than just this. There's a lot of different accounts how these people died. And but the fact is, it remains pretty clear that they were martyred. How they were martyred, one account varies little from the other. It can be a topic of great research if you are so inclined to look into it, because there's a lot more on the topic than what I'm going to cover here briefly. And so once I get my tea going here, get into it. All right, I'm going to start going through pictures, and it's not going to be my face on here, which is good, because actually I got to turn the light on so I can read this fine print. All right, so the first one we're going to cover is Andrew, the brother of Peter. Andrew, the brother of Peter, martyrdom by crucifixion. He was bound, as in tied up, not nailed, to an X-shaped cross at Patra, Achaia, which is in southern Greece. He was hung alive for 2 days, extorting spectators all the while. And a lot of these people are said to have preached right up to their last breath the good news to all the people that come along to see these people die a slow, agonizing death for whatever reason. Okay, next, Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel. He was martyred by being skinned alive and crucified, head downward, by the idolaters of Armenia, which is now Western Asia near Turkey. He was the most traveled of the disciples after Jesus' death. He preached the gospel in Mesopotamia, which is in Iraq today, Persia, which is Iran, and in Ethiopia, Arabia, and India. And he died a pretty gruesome death eventually. Next is James the Greater, son of Zebedee, brother of John. He was beheaded or stabbed with a sword by Herod Agrippa around 44 AD near Palestine, and not far from where he was a local missionary to the Jews in Judea. Now here's the thing about this, which is really tells you there's more of a backstory to these things than what you get on the surface. His accuser, he preached to his accuser and everybody right up to the end. His accuser was converted by James, by his courage, and the two of them were beheaded together. His accuser wanted to be beheaded along with James. He became converted. Okay, then there's James the Lesser, who was the son of Alphaeus. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing these right. He was also the first bishop of Jerusalem. He was martyred in his early 90s by being thrown from a pinnacle of the temple of Jerusalem. And he didn't die. No, wait, I'm sorry. Then there was another one, I'm confused. Then he was stoned and his head was bashed in with clubs. Told you this is pretty gruesome. Then there's John, known as the Beloved, also son of Zebedee, brother of James. He's the only one. He died a natural death, but he almost didn't. He's the only apostle who did not meet a martyr's death. Banished by Roman Emperor Domitian to the Isle of Patmos, where he penned the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. He was later freed and went to preach in Turkey and died at the age of 100. And most of these men were quite old when they checked out of this world, either by martyrdom or, like John, natural causes, 100 years old. All right, we've got Jude Thaddeus, who wrote the book of Jude. He is said to have been martyred by being beaten with a club and then crucified in the year 72 AD in the city of Edessa, which is in Turkey, while on a missionary trip that went to present-day Iran, then known as Persia. Then we have Judas Iscariot, who died of suicide. He's said to have hung himself, and there's also scriptural reference to say that he was, how do you say it? Gutted, entrails, like his stomach ripped open. There's not sure, whether it happened during his hanging or after. There's a lot of different information on these, but he hung himself. You know, if he just would have asked Jesus for forgiveness, he would have received it. I'm pretty sure of that. Well, moving on, we've got Matthew, the Levi, who was martyred around 60 AD by being staked and speared to the ground. He preached in Ethiopia, Africa, and was killed for questioning the morals of the king. That was Matthew, wrote the book of Matthew. A lot of old churches are in Africa, Ethiopia namely. Now we've got Simon Peter, known as the Rock, Petra. He was martyred by crucifixion in Rome by Nero. Crucified around 68 AD, upside down at his request, because he did not consider himself worthy to be crucified like Jesus. Simon Peter. Next we have Philip. He was said to have been tortured, impaled with iron hooks in his ankles, and hung upside down to die, preaching to his death in the year 54 AD in Heliopolis, Egypt. He preached in Phrygia, 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 which was in the Roman province of Asia near Ephesus, present-day Turkey. And that's Philip. Died a gruesome death. And he could have gotten out of it. This is the martyrs. They were doing Christ's work. And they knew the risk. And then we move on. We've got Simon the Canaanite, called Simon the Zealot. Because he was associated with the sect, the Christians, thought to have ministered mostly in Jordan, he was martyred by crucifixion in Britain in 74 AD. And then he was sawn in half in Britain. If any of my ancestors had anything to do with that. Next, we have Thomas Didymus, who was martyred. He was thrust through by spear in India. You know, these guys got around preaching the word of Christ. He preached the gospel also in Parthia, which is modern-day Iran, and in Kerala, southern India, where yet today the Mar Thomas Church exists. That's Thomas, Doubting Thomas, known as someone who knew Jesus, personally, one of his disciples. Made it all the way to India, preaching, establishing the church. Mark, or John Mark. Next we have John Mark. Was dictated in writing the book of Mark. He was martyred by being dragged to death. Next we have Luke, known also as the physician. He wrote the book of Luke and the Acts. He was hanged on an olive tree. Next we have Matthias, the disciple who filled the place of Judas. Acts chapter 1, 20 through 26. He was stoned and beheaded in Jerusalem. We next have the Apostle Paul, formerly known as Saul, before his conversion. He wrote half of the New Testament, and he was beheaded by Emperor Nero in Rome. Finally, we have James, the half-brother of Jesus, who was thrown some 100 feet off a wall. This was done to him after he repeatedly refused to deny the faith of Jesus. This was done to him after he repeatedly refused to deny his faith in Jesus. All right, been a long day. He refused to deny his faith in Jesus, his own half-brother. He survived the fall, 100 feet fall off a wall, that is, where he was thrown. And so they went on to beat him to death with clubs, and some accounts say stones. If they had AK-47s, they would have used that, but maybe not. They had knives and swords. They seemed to prefer grizzly things, grisly things, stones and clubs. I think beheading would have been the most merciful, probably, but some of these, Philip, I think he was skinned. This is awful. There's a lot of different accounts of how some of these disciples, apostles of Christ, met their end. But all but John gave their life up for it. And John actually was facing being boiled in oil, boiled alive. He was facing a pretty grisly death, but he was acquitted. And so he went on and lived to be 100 and preached the word right up to then. So, they're still killing Christians in parts of the world. And who knows, the way this country's going anymore, there's a whole lot of people, a growing number of people that are setting themselves against Christians hardcore, as you know. And it's not just Islamic extremists. We got them right in our own country here where I'm at, who it's the devil's work. But these men gave their lives, and thousands, probably millions of other men and women, children, old people of all walks, all races, have given their lives in the name of Jesus, and they still are. I mean, look what happened in Armenia, the genocide of the Christians, Armenians in Turkey, and millions just because they're Christians, and I could go on and on. So, I think sometimes I'm putting out personal stuff on this channel, and sometimes I get a little emotional because I share from my heart, my soul, and I'm talking about things in my life or things I've seen, things like that, my testimony. You have a testimony. I think we all have a testimony. And I wonder, should I be doing this? Some people have said to me that know me, you really should be putting it out there. It's my testimony. What am I afraid of? I'm going to be embarrassed? Or somebody's going to think I'm hallucinating? If I said I had a demonic attack, one of my commenters, I think they meant, was trying to tell me that I've got a mental illness. It's not the first time I've heard that. Not by a doctor, but by people that don't believe in, the spirit world at all. They don't believe it. And I can't say, if I didn't believe it at all, I'd probably think somebody was either a great liar and storyteller or they were mentally ill. I'd be inclined to think the same. But I know differently. And there was actually a time where I questioned why these things happened to me. I think it was back in my 20s or 30s. And it occurred to me, I've served in the military. I got promoted ahead of my peers. I did very well at everything I do. I'm usually not bragging, but I'm usually head and shoulders above the rest of my group wherever I'm at, whatever we're trying to do. Sometimes I'm the best, sometimes I'm right up there at the top. So I am bragging a little bit, but nobody ever thought I was crazy that knew me personally. I never heard that in my life. None of my family thought I was crazy either, that I know of. My parents didn't, the schools didn't. I made it through my master's to teach. And you got to get screened. I got cleared to teach, which nowadays there's a lot of nutty people teaching. So much for that, huh? But quite often, what really clinched it that I wasn't hallucinating was that a lot of people witnessed the same things. They were with me and witnessed the same things I talked about. There's corroborating evidence, quite a bit of it, usually, not always, but usually. So what am I afraid of on here? Somebody's going to think I'm a nut? I don't care. Think that. I'm not even offended. I I'm afraid that I'm going to embarrass myself by getting teary-eyed, getting choked up, because I'm trying to talk from my heart and my soul, my testimony. Ghost stories, but they always have God comes out on top in these. God's glory through everything. All things work to the good to them that love the Lord. What do I serve the Lord. I hope to serve the Lord. And my time on earth will be over before I know it. I mean, I was at the checkout counter today, and I bought some beer, which is still in my car. Now that I remember it. And the woman, the checkout woman, she, I know her. I know. It's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. We have a lot of small talk. Always, it's a given. Young, old, in between. It's all small talk, really. I kind of like it, but it can be too much at times. But so we chat all the time. They chat with everybody. When you're in line, you gotta be patient because everybody's going to chat. Well, she ID'd me, and I thought this woman looks to be about 70 or something. I'm just thinking this. Sorry, she looked pretty wrinkled up and pruned. No offense, but she's 7 years younger than me. 7 years younger than me. And I said, I remember that. She told me the year she was born when she looked at my ID. And she might have been making it up. I don't know. I said, I remember that year the Beatles were still playing. I was living in San Jose, California. It was a good year, unless you were in Vietnam. I'm looking there like, wow. Where was I going with this? Oh, I'll be gone before I know it. Just like my dear ones that have left before me, the ones you've been hearing about a lot lately, Jen and my mom, two of the people I love the most on this world, two of the people, there are others, gone. And when you're gone, you're gone. I believe both of them came back to let me know they're all right. God allowed that in His mercy to comfort those that mourn. And He did in my case with both of those people. And to let me know that they're doing very well and they're at peace. And I hope to do a talk on heaven. I've got a few things that occurred to me with a lot of things. But when you're gone from here, you're gone. And that's it. That's the way it's supposed to be. But I'm going to be the same way, gone from here. Anybody that knew me, they'll be gone before they know it. And next thing you know, it's like we never were here. Except in God's book of life that has us recorded. I don't know, whatever else. So I really don't care if I come across, overly emotional or I'm sharing personal parts of my life and nothing disgraceful. If it was disgraceful, I wouldn't be sharing it. And I don't do disgraceful things as a rule. You have to take my word on that. But there's no disgrace in it. Big guys don't cry when somebody they love dies. Where'd they get that from? The movies? I don't care. Really don't care. That's one thing. I did all this gung-ho stuff. I'm glad I did in the Army. Paratrooper, tank commander, all kinds of He-Man stuff, which is kind of crazy, but when you're young and you think you're immortal, I don't have anything to prove to anybody. I don't need a big loud truck. I don't need to act like a tough guy, Most tough guys act like tough guys are anything but tough guys in my experience. So seeing how the disciples lived their life, preaching the word of Jesus Christ, they didn't just sit still. They went out. He commanded them to go out and spread the word, didn't He? That's in the Bible. I didn't look it up, but it is in the Bible. You can look it up. And they did that. They went all the way from Britain up into Europe, parts of Europe, India, Africa, all through what we call the Middle East and Eastern Asia. They went all over the place, Mediterranean, and all but John gave their life in a pretty grisly way, and they laid their lives down. They could have gotten out of it. I'm sure they could have. All they do is renounce their faith in Christ. Probably would have been pardoned, you know, or just picked it up and called it a day and went somewhere else. But they didn't. But counts have, most of them, even while they're hanging on crosses or about to be killed, still preaching the good word of Christ, up to the point where one of them actually converted his accuser, who insisted to be beheaded along with him. I'm not going to read that again. So, you know, for me to share my testimony here, I'm grateful I have the means to do it. I mean, I like the candles, I like the natural lighting, honestly, as opposed to this. I don't, you know, this is all I've got. I would do these in my backyard, but the ambient noise is too loud. But I'm grateful to have this venue to be able to share my testimonies and also socialize. Honestly, it is a social outlet for me, and I appreciate it. So that's all. I didn't plan. I talked too much. Stay tuned. I'm going to do some other videos. I've got a couple of days off, then I'm going to work. I plan to work 4 more days, and then I'm going to quit that job. It's a night job. I don't want to work nights anymore anyway. And then au revoir, bonjour, France. I'm flying to Paris and then going off to Brittany, to the coast. And hopefully that goes well and safe, and I will post a lot of stuff from that. At least that's the plan. Why France? I don't know. It was years ago. Jen and I were bored, and we were looking on the internet at real estate around the world and who has the prettiest houses. And I was hoping it would be in England, quaint country homes. Nope. Ireland, nope. Germany, nope. Definitely not, in my opinion. France, Italy, nope. Italy's kind of austere. France, hands down, had the prettiest country homes on earth. And the seaside and southern France, all the way up. They've got like all the climates in one country, about as big as the state of Texas. But the sea coast in northern Brittany appealed to me just from the pictures, so I decided to make it happen. Worked hard for this. I've digressed greatly from the disciples' death and what the implications are to us. If you have a testimony, I would implore you to share it. You know, however you see fit, but that's up to you. So, all right, that's all. I really tend to go on and on. But I'm looking at how these people, I'm going on some more, how these disciples of Christ gave their life. And am I ashamed to talk about God on the World Wide Web to whoever tunes into this? No. I mean, what am I facing? Criticism? These guys faced some pretty horrible deaths, and they took it before they denounced their faith. All right. Thank you. Take care.